So the billionaire guy that I was hanging out with yesterday that I told you about, I got a lot deeper down into his story today, and it is magnificent. We were at lunch today, and he was feeling generous with his verbiage, so he told me a lot of his backstory. And he's like, "Yeah, I worked for a small firm, and when I started, and he's like, my first job, I started managing a bit of money, and he just has this way of speaking that is very nonchalant about everything that he's doing. But carrying on without using his lexicon, he basically went on to said that the goal of Wall Street was to keep you working all day. So he said a limousine would pick him up every single morning, drive him to work. Right when he got to work and he got to his desk, he got his shoes shined. Literally, they would come and shine his shoes. And he's like, you don't have to do that. But then he had to. And he would get his breakfast hand delivered, his lunch hand delivered. Uh, he would get his dinner towards the end of the day hand delivered. And then what they would do is they would come back and shine his shoes again when all he did was walk to the bathroom a few times. And before he told me that story, he said, hey, when I first started, I went to the fax machine and I was just printing out some copies for just a few charts that I was looking at. And then he said one of the senior directors at the kind of office that he was working at came over and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" He was like, "I'm printing out my copies." He was like, "If I see you doing this again, you're done." He's like, Why the hell would you care?" He's like, "I pay you so much fucking money to do your job, which is to make me money." So he was like, "We pay people to do this for you. You have two secretaries." And I was like, you had two secretaries?" He's like, but then he continued his story. So his boss said, "You have two secretaries whose entire job is to assist you with this during the day. If I see you doing this again, you are done." And he was basically saying the only job that they had for you was to make them money. And I was like, "What? How much money were they spending on you?" He's like, "Maybe $500,000 a year." And I was like, "What the hell? Why would they do that?" And then I didn't actually say that, but thinking about it, the only reason they would spend that much money is if you are making them 10, $100 million a year. So they have the incentive to keep you at your desk working so you can maximize profits for the firm. Eventually, he left the firm and he started his own. Well, he had a few more jobs, but for the last 30 years, he had his own little hedge fund, which he managed like $50 billion. And the way that they get money is you get a 2% management fee. So 2% of 50 billion. And then you get 20% of the profits. And he was doing about 10% a month for a good 10 years. 10% a month. Think about how much money that is. It is ridiculous. But he didn't want to tell me about the trades. That's what I want to care about. That's what I asked about. But what he told me about was he hired a director. And before he said he called her the director of fun because he was living in San Francisco and he said they were pretty much just printing money. He was like, I gotta have some fun. So they had like a decent staff, and he hired this lady, and he gave her an unlimited budget, and he said, whatever you do, when the market closes, we are to have fun. So her job every single day was to figure out what fun activity they would do, and he said she was spending upwards of $80,000 a day on director of fun. Are you kidding me? I was like, what the fuck is going on right now? I mean, think about the Wolf of Wall Street, what they would do in that movie where they were just tearing shit up. They're in these megalodonious sized parties every single day. He didn't tell us what he was doing, but if you're spending upwards of $80,000, and this is in the 90s, every single day, just on fun stuff, what the hell is going on? That is crazy. It is crazy stuff. And so he pretty much then, I mean, that's just kind of his story. But now let's break down some of the things that I actually learned from him because he is a fascinating guy. And I'm going to be getting dinner with him pretty soon, which I'm excited about. But he said, hey, you only get a few really good opportunities in your life. He said for him, he was in Japan during the late 80s, a massive Japanese bubble. It was literally one of the biggest stock market bubbles in the world. He made a shit ton of money there. 99, he was in San Francisco, riding the entire dot-com bubble. 2008, he was short the housing and everything market. 2011 and 12, he bought as much real estate as he possibly could. 2020, he went as long stocks as you can. And then he was telling me about an arbitrage that he was doing. And this arbitrage was incredible. This is what he did a lot throughout his career. There would be a mismatch in pricing, and then he would fill the void. There's a Bitcoin ETF called the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. And he said that he was in early like 2013 or something. He said when Bitcoin was $1, he said he was trying to buy some, and he's like, you know what, just buy me like 20,000 of them. But then his assistant came back and he said, she was like, oh, you have to mine them. And he's like, screw it. Then he said he was trying again at 200, but it was still too difficult to buy it. So he's like, never mind. And then he said in 2020, or after the 2017 crypto run, when Bitcoin got up to 17,000, it then went down to 3. And there was an arbitrage with the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So he said in around 2018, and now he's just managing his personal money for reference, but however many millions or billions of dollars that is, the numbers are about to get crazy for 1 second. So with this ETF, basically what it is if you give your money to Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, what they do is they go and purchase the Bitcoin and they hold it for you. The reason why they would do this is if you have a big pension ETF, a big pension or hedge fund that's trying to buy Bitcoin, they can't buy Bitcoin directly. They have to go through this type of ETF or ETN. So they go to the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust to buy the Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin was trading at a 40% over what Bitcoin was worth on that exchange. And there was a lot of technical reasons for that. I'm not going to explain that for the simplicity of this video. But there was a way that the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and this was open for everybody, they said, hey, we will give you we will sell you the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust equal to the net asset value of the Bitcoin if you are willing to hold up the Bitcoin for 1 year. And basically, then you get to sell it. So think about that. You hold it for 1 year, and you get to sell Bitcoin at a 40% premium to what you were buying it at. So if it was at the time, it was like 5,000. So 40% higher than that is another $2,500. So if Bitcoin stayed the same, you would profit 40%, right? So he said every single week he was putting about 250 grand into that. When Bitcoin was 3,500, think about that. He's buying it at a 40% discount to Bitcoin. And he was buying 250 grand of that a week. But then what happened? COVID, everything hit. And then Bitcoin went from 3,500 up to 50,000. He said he was doing that until then. 200, that is like he said he was doing it from like 2018, and that's when he started buying 250 grand a week. And then after the year hold up, he would just roll all the profits back into it. The compounding of that, he probably made like 3,000% gains on his portfolio, or at least on that trade. He probably made $100 million just from that with his personal money. But then what is really interesting, how he caught it when it was no longer going to work. Because he said only him and a few other people figured out what you could do with this, because you could just pretty much print free money if you were willing to hold up your money for a year, unless there was something crazy that happened. But then he said there was about a few hundred million to like $2 billion in the Grayscale ETF. But then what happened? Over like a few month process, a lot of other hedge funds started to pick up on this trade, and they started to pile in. And he said then it went up from 2 billion up to like 50 billion market cap. So he said, fuck, everybody else is hopping in on this. What they're going to do is they're going to dump it in a year just like I am. Up to that run up, he then shorted it because he knew that everyone was going to dump it and there wouldn't have been enough supply on the market. I mean, this guy is a fucking genius. He is a absolute genius. And so what is he doing now? Now he's incredibly bearish on the economy, incredibly bearish. He said probably the most he's ever been. And he thinks this is a once in a generational lifetime to buy TLT, which is just a bond proxy. And you go long via options. So I was thinking the exact same thing. But what I've been doing is just rolling T bills because you get a risk free 5% return. Pretty much any money I get, any excess capital. I haven't had too much recently because I've been doing trips like this, but I've just been dumping it into short term treasuries. Think about it. Right now, what's your upside in the stock market? There's so many risks. Everything's overpriced. Bonds, which are completely risk free, you're getting 5% yield. So that's what I've been doing. But he is saying that he's basically buying a long bond ETF, which if the Fed has to cut rates, that would fucking skyrocket. So if the economy does bad and the Federal Reserve has to come out and cut interest rates, this ETF is going to go up 200%. And then if you have mega long dated options on it, you are going to get 1,000% on that. So I think I'm going to do this as well. So how do you actually play it? What I'm going to do is go a year and a half out because you want to buy as much time as possible because this is a macro thesis and this is going to take probably 9 months to play out. It's going to take a very long time. So you want to give yourself as much time exposure as possible. I might even buy the 2025 strikes. I'm not going to get too in depth on this channel about that because it's macro related. So I don't think too many people care. But that is, I think, what I'm going to do because I can take the risk where I don't really need the excess capital. And I also think it is an incredible opportunity. I'm not just following what he's saying because I've been thinking about the TLT, but when you listen to someone like this, put it into perspective as to, okay, you can get 5% on your money, but how much money are you making? And I was like, yeah, blank, blank, blank. He's like, that's nothing. He's like, if you want to make money, how are you going to compound that? He's like, this is what I'm doing. He's like, you probably shouldn't do it, but I'm an idiot, so I'm going to. I will not going to put all my money, obviously, but I think I'm definitely going to play that long dated option strategy. I used to do this quite a bit. So probably 2 years out on a long bond ETF TLT. He said this is probably the best generational call that he's had in a very long time because he says it's an absolute no brainer. It is a absolute no brainer. Then it just comes down to executing in every single niche of the way. And that's where he's a pro. I'm not. But I think it's very, very interesting. There's so many little details that I learned. Also, he said, he said that I asked him, hey, how accurate are Billions and the old Wall Street movie, where you basically have mass insider trading and there's so much fishy stuff going on? He said almost exactly like that. There's a ton of truth. There's so much shady stuff going on. And I'm going to guess he was probably doing some of that stuff. Not wildly illegal, but things that are on the precipice of the border where, I mean, because he doesn't like to talk about the things that he did. And he understood a lot of these arbitrage plays. It's kind of like that Spider-Man meme. When you see a fraud, it's probably because you've done it before. And I would not be surprised if him and most other people on this island have. So when you see these massive hedge funds making so much money, a lot of it is because of insider trading. I don't think anybody really doubted that, but this guy was there and he completely confirmed it. He said, oh, dude, it's probably a lot crazier than what those shows and movies suggested. So very, very interesting nonetheless. And then one other thing that I would note is nothing that he was talking about was overly complex. You hear some people trying to talk a completely different language and they are trying to code and do all this insane stuff. He's made so much money just keeping it simple, finding tweaks in the market where there is an arbitrage situation. And I think this works with everything at any business that you are doing because I was relating what he was talking about to the current business that I'm running. Because if you just work a little bit smarter instead of trying to get super complex with it, then the results are usually much better for much less stress and effort. And that is the goal, right? So interesting nonetheless. Goodbye.